for them to come in. We won't wait, they'll join us after, I guess. So just getting over a little flu. You'll have to excuse me if I have to step or get a recess or some sort from time to time. For the record, my name is Tanya Fernandes Anderson, and the District 7 City Councilor. I'm the chair on the Committee on Ways and Means. This hearing is being recorded. It is being live streamed at boston.gov/citycouncil-TV and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Files Channel 964. Just for those who are listening, the website, is bostongov/CITV/COUNCIL-TV. The Council's budget review process will encompass a series of public hearings beginning in April and running through June. We strongly encourage residents to take a moment to encourage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. Attend one of our hearings and give public testimony. We will take public testimony at the end of each, that's actually wrong. We'll actually alternate between councilors and public testimony. We're doing it a little bit different just in fairness to those who are here and those who would like to testify. So we'll do a first round and go to public testimony, second round, and public testimony again. And also the full hearing schedule is on our website, boston.gov/council-budget. Our scheduled hearings dedicated to public testimony are tomorrow, April 26th at 6 p.m. and June 2nd at 6 p.m. You can give testimony in person here in the chamber or virtually via Zoom. For in-person testimony, please come to the chamber and sign up on the sheet near the entrance. The virtual testimony, for virtual testimony, you can sign up using our online form on our council budget review website or by emailing the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. When you are called to testify, please state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to 2 minutes, literally a couple, to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Email your written testimony to the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Submit a 2-minute video or your testimony through the form on our website. For more information on City Council budget process and how to testify, please visit the City Council's budget website, boston.gov/council-budget. Today's hearing is on dockets number 0480- through 0482. Orders for the FY23 operating budget, including annual operations for departmental operations for the school department and for post-employment benefits, OPEB. Docket number 0483, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Dockets number 0484 to 0486, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Our focus area for this hearing will be administration and finance, budget overview presentation, including revenue. Our panelists for today's hearings are Jim Williamson, Director of Office of Budget Management, Johanna Bernstein, hi, Director of Operating from also OBM, Gabby's here, right? There you are. Gabby Hermanos, is that how you say your name? Germanos, Assistant Director Operating, also OBM. Todd Swisher, Hi, Todd. Revenue Manager operating from OBM. I am joined today by my colleagues, Councillor Kenzie Bach, District 1. Is that right? You're 8? Yeah, it's the flu. From District 8, Councillor Ed Flynn, District 2, Councillor Liz Braden, District 9, Councillor Ruzi Louisiane at large, Councillor Frank Baker, District 3. Thank you everyone who is in attendance at today's hearings and this initial budget session of many that will be held in the upcoming weeks. As a chairperson on Ways and Means Committee, I look forward to a process that will unfold. As the person steering these hearings, I eagerly anticipate collaborating with my colleagues and the council with Mayor Wu's administration and civically engaged activities and advocates representing their communities and organizations. Together, I believe we can coalesce to create a budget that benefits the mass of Boston's people. With this as our starting point, we will lead from that place of equity, always remembering to center those who have historically been forced to exist on the margins. And I'm gonna keep my comments short. I think that we're here to get straight to the work, so I look forward to working with you and listening and hopefully extend each other the courtesy that it takes in order for us to do this work. Just for the rules, I'm going to allow you 10 to 20 minutes to present. Hopefully you only take 10 minutes. That's a good 5-minute limit for each person to present, if that suffices. Then we will do a first rounds of questions by order of arrival with the council. And I'm asking that everyone takes 5 minutes between questions and answers. You will be asked to stop speaking if your time is up. And I ask that you are courteous again and respect the rules. If I ask you that you stop speaking, that you wait for a turn for a second round before you can continue further questions. And then we will go to public testimony. Again, for the sake of, just in interest of being fair, we'll allow 2 minutes for public testimony each, and then we'll come back to a second round. And now I think I will turn to the presentation to administration for presentation, and then to our council colleagues if they have any opening statements. You have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, councilors. My name is Jim Williamson, the Director of the Office of Budget Management, or OBM. As you mentioned, I'm joined here with the operating budget team by Johanna Bernstein, Gabby Germanos, and Todd Swisher. We are very happy to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity to begin the City Council hearings phase of the FY23 budget process. We understand that the truly historic dimension of this moment, with city charter change ratified by the voters last fall, this past winter's first ever administration and City Council jointly hosted budget-focused listening sessions, and now the administration and the council working collaboratively together to review the budget as recommended, together as co-equals, with many shared priorities and a fiduciary responsibility to create both an effective while still balanced budget. We trust that you share the similar sentiments and overarching goals of this budget to set a foundation for the future, connecting our communities and delivering on the details of city services across our neighborhoods. So just a little table setting before we start. While the overall context of this budget stresses an all-funds approach to leverage the connectivity of resources, this presentation will be focused on the city's annual operating budget. In this case, FY23. It totals $3.99 billion and is growing by $216 million, which is a 5.7% budget growth. We will be back this afternoon with the Public Facilities Departments and the Operation Cabinet to provide a presentation on the annual update to the city's 5-year capital plan. We understand the American Rescue Plan appropriation orders and dockets have been assigned to a separate committee on Boston's COVID-19 recovery, and with its first hearing scheduled for next week. So we'd like to say that a good budget process starts with the community. An effective community-led process is key to ensuring the community's priorities are heard. With that, I'm going to ask for the slide to be advanced and turn it over to Gabby Germanos to talk about our engagement process.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So hi, Gabby Germanos. And you can actually advance to the next slide. Do you have the slide advancer? Okay, so you can do the next slide. All right, great. So as Jim said, we wanted to start off by talking about budget engagement because the 23 recommended budget is really rooted in the feedback that we received from the public. And our office, the city, has engaged in budget engagement efforts before, like our Moving Through the Budget initiative that we've talked about a bit from last year. But this year, the mayor really wanted to hear people's thoughts before we submitted the budget to you all in April, so that the budget could actually incorporate the feedback we heard back from the public. So we're really excited to do that for the first time. Next slide, please. So that's why this year we held this pilot listening tour and survey that you're aware of to solicit public input. So in a very accelerated time frame, we were able to hear from over 1,000 participants, either through a digital survey provided in 12 different languages or one of 4 virtual listening sessions organized by council district. And we also want to say we're really appreciative of all the help that we got from City Council in getting the word out. I know where I live in the South End, I saw a lot of local papers, community groups that had been reached out to by Councillor Flynn's office. So we really appreciate that, as well as working with the Office of Neighborhood Services, ONS, who also took the lead on outreach. So we heard a lot of different ideas from the public, but we wanted to highlight a few major takeaways. So one is that people really want to know how the city allocates resources by priority. So as you'll see later in the presentation, and as we highlighted at the budget breakfast last week, we are bucketing our investments in 10 different high priority areas that cross housing, schools, transportation, open space, and more. And people also want their voices to be heard in different ways. So again, we were very excited to have a digital survey translated into different languages and to have these listening sessions. But for future budget engagement, we're also going to be looking to continue making this as accessible as possible with in-person outreach and other ways of reaching out. Next slide, please. So now we wanted to highlight some of the high-level demographic information. Again, this is very high level in terms of who responded to the survey, who attended the listening sessions. You can see more of this data in depth if you go to the budget website at budget.boston.gov. That's budget.boston.gov. Also, the survey is still open and collecting responses. Although we looked at responses through March 4th to inform the recommended budget, we want to keep soliciting feedback as we move into FY23 and as we're creating future budget engagement.
Can you read the responses for the survey? Can you actually read that?
Oh yeah, I was about to, but yes, of course. So we received 559 responses as of March 4th. 528 of those were in English. 1 in 5 respondents were from JP, another 1 in 5 were from Dorchester or West Roxbury. 59.3% of respondents who chose to identify their race selected white, 12.4 as Hispanic or Latinx, 11.6 as Black or African American, and 6.2 as Asian. And we had a generally good distribution of ages, but under 18 was underrepresented at 6.3%. Again, if you go to budget.boston.gov, you can explore this data more further. And at the listening sessions, while we didn't collect demographic data from attendance, we did have almost 500 total participants, 145 for districts 5, 6, and 8, 66 for districts 1, 3, and 4, 105 for districts 2, 7, and 9, and then 182 participants at the citywide listening session. So I do want to stress that this engagement initiative was a pilot. Again, we had a very short time frame to make this all happen. And so it's also important to note that we took all this feedback into consideration holistically. When putting together the budget, we recognized that some organizations and advocacy group showed up in force, which was great, while other voices were underrepresented, historically underrepresented communities. We weren't able to capture as much of that as we wanted to. And we're certainly not looking to just check a box here as compliance, check, we did budget engagement. We recognize really that the more voices we can get as part of this process, the stronger our budget is going to be and the more representative it's going to be for the city. So we're very proud of the efforts we did this year, but also for future engagement efforts, we're going to continue to work closely with ONS, and we'll start even earlier in the process, maybe doing engagement in the summer and the fall, to really give us more time to reach out to those communities and do more physical outreach, continue to make the process more accessible. Next slide. And then finally, again, I know we shared this at the budget breakfast. This is also on our website, but we just wanted to highlight this word cloud that shows major themes and priorities that came out of the survey and the listening sessions. And as we delve into discussing the new transformative investments in this budget a little bit later in the presentation, you'll see these priorities reflected across departments and policy areas. Yeah, so now I think I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Gabby. Okay, so the annual budget is managed through the city's budget framework. And through the pandemic, even with economic impacts, the city's finances remain in a strong position. AAA credit ratings for the 8th straight year, a strong local economy anchored by a stable revenue source in property taxes, management-based fiscal responsibility, and a commitment to running an effective and efficient city government. The fiscal year 2023 budget builds on a track record and makes critical targeted investments in Boston's future. Okay, so I'm going to get through this slide fairly quickly. This was included in the presentation at last week's budget breakfast. First, we see a visual representation of the FY23 operating budget as a pie chart. It totals $3.99 billion. You can see public education is the largest slice at 40% and is one of the most critical and fundamental services provided at the local level. Next is public safety. Public safety is almost 17%. In other city departments like parks, library, transportation, public health. And we also talked about this budget includes a reserve for collective bargaining, and that represents 2% of this budget proposal. As union contracts are settled, the City Council will be directly involved in moving this funding out of the reserve into departmental budgets. So far the City Council has heard the CENA union, and just last week we did AFSCME before City Council. Also in this pie chart, there's a slice for fixed costs, and includes long-term commitments like pension obligation and debt service to support the capital plan. Those areas of the budget are things that the credit rating agencies look at very closely because they show your sort of credit worthiness. It's sort of akin to like when a credit rating agency looks at a consumer and their on-time payment schedule. They look to our communities honoring their long-term commitments that they've made. Next slide. So here are the major components of this year's operating budget growth, which totals $216 million. So as we were talking about, is that slice of the pie, $71 million of the growth supports fair wages and retention of city employees for collective bargaining. $44.2 million of the increase is for transformative departmental investments. $40.1 million is to support Boston Public Schools, and $60.2 million is for fixed cost growth to maintain fiscal stability and support the city's capital plan. So some of this we covered at Councilor the equity and budgeting hearing on April 1st, but I will recap here and to build off the comments you made as an introduction. We continue to strive to make improvements to develop the budget through an equity lens. OBM's work is guided by our equity mission statement. I'll read it here today. OBM's working definition of equity is for every resident, regardless of background, to be and feel empowered to thrive in Boston. OBM works to ensure that investments are consistent with the mayor's equity priorities. We recognize that equitable levels of investment require an iterative process of constant evaluation of city needs and the needs of highly vulnerable or historically excluded groups. The resident requests and desires as well. We will apply the same quality analysis on every request. OBM strives to address historic uneven levels of investment and aims to bring all services to all neighborhoods at the same high level. One of the things that we activated this through is the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet closely was involved in all of the decision-making process through the budget process. In discussions with departments, budget discussions about budget proposals included how investments would support equity goals. And with that, I will turn it over to Todd Swisher to talk about revenue.
Thank you, Jim. So to set the financial context for the FY23 budget, I will briefly review revenue estimates. As you know, Boston is required to produce a balanced operating budget in which total general fund revenue equals total expenditures. Here are some highlights of the FY23 revenue budget. The FY23 general fund revenue budget totals $3.99 billion. The $216 million or 5.7% projected growth in FY23 over the FY22 budget would be the highest since the pre-pandemic period. This growth is largely driven by property taxes, the city's largest and most stable source of revenue. State aid is up in FY23, but net state aid is essentially flat. Local revenue, the combination of excises and departmental revenue, is expected to grow as the local economy continues to recover. However, local revenue was so deeply impacted by COVID-19 that it will still be well short of pre-pandemic levels in FY23, with federal relief funding helping to bridge the gap. Next slide. So here you can see a breakdown of revenue sources as a share of the total budget, as well as changes between FY22 and FY23. Note that all revenue sources, with the exception of non-recurring revenue, are increasing in FY23. Next slide. So property taxes are the largest city revenue source, providing 74% of total general fund revenue. In FY23, the combination of the 2.5% allowable levy increase, new growth from construction and renovations, and an adjustment to cover property tax abatements are projected to increase revenue from property taxes by $154 million or 5.5%. In raising revenue through the property tax, the city is mindful of minimizing costs to residents. The city offers the maximum allowable residential exemption of 35% and fully weights the residential commercial split in favor of residents. The result is a single-family tax bill that in FY22 is 30% lower than the statewide average. Next slide, thanks. The next largest source of revenue for the city, state aid, makes up just over 12% of general fund revenue. Note that due to the state's budget timeline, these numbers come from the budget the governor submitted in January. In FY23, state aid will be increasing by roughly $16 million or 3.4%. While the increase is welcome, the city evaluates state aid on net, meaning the aid remaining after subtracting state assessments. Net state aid in FY23 is virtually flat, increasing just 0.4%. In the bigger picture, state aid has fallen over $300 million or 70% over the last 2 decades when it made up 30%. This has increased reliance on property taxes and other revenue sources. Next slide. And as you can see on this final revenue slide, the chart, local revenue was dramatically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, falling $190 million or nearly a third between FY19 and FY21. In FY23, the city will dedicate $40 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding to replace lost revenue, down from $55 million used in FY22. In FY23, local revenue is projected to grow by about $61 million, or about 15%, as the economy gradually rebounds. Nevertheless, even with this critical addition of Arpa funding, the gap between FY23 and pre-pandemic levels of local revenue will still be over $100 million. And next, my colleague Johanna Bernstein will talk about investments.
Next slide. So Boston's budget supports a broad swath of new programs. Our goal is to find ways for priorities to support each other and to leverage all funds in order to create generational change. While the following investments will be discussed in greater detail at department hearings in the coming weeks, we wanted to give you guys a very high-level preview. Slide. To advance climate resilience, we're investing over $1.5 million between the Environment Department and the Parks Department to implement both immediate change, caring for our trees, and long-term change, citywide resiliency planning goals. To ensure our city remains vibrant as well as resilient, the Arts and Culture Department will receive 2 new positions that will support ARPA and capital investments and further engage the community. Next slide. In Transformative Mobility, the Streets Cabinet will receive funding for 12 new positions to focus on active transportation, street safety, transit, and new forms of mobility. As residents of Boston, I know we're all excited to get into the details of the city's 3-year, $380 million commitment to housing and supportive services. Next slide. As our Chief of Equity previously noted, this budget does not give people voices. It amplifies the voice they already have. New offices for Black male advancement and LGBTQ+ advancement, along with over $3 million in language and communications access funding, supports that goal. During our engagement process, we heard over and over that we need funding for youth jobs. Youth advocates called for 5,000 summer jobs. This budget exceeds that with a goal of 6,000 youth jobs this summer. Next slide. This budget also meets a critical need exacerbated by the pandemic: greater mental and behavioral health support based on a bedrock of public health research. In regards to public safety, during our engagement process, co-response models were a very high priority, as well as general reform. We are directly addressing these needs with multiple co-response options and OPAT investments. Next slide. Through the new Office of Early Childhood, this budget is leading a shift in how we comprehensively meet the needs of parents and children alike. Expanded BPS counseling options also provide comprehensive services to make sure our kids get the tools they need to thrive. Finally, last but certainly not least, this budget meets multiple basic city service requirements. From librarians to 311 call takers, this budget will ensure that the basics get done so that we can focus on the big picture. And again, we will be going through all of these investments in much greater detail in the coming weeks and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors, for listening to our presentation, and we're opening it up to you guys to ask us any questions you'd like.
Thank you. I'll turn to my counselor colleagues first, and if they have asked questions that I have way too many of them. And if they've asked them, I'll cross them off my list, and that way I'll ask only the remaining that hasn't been asked. Our counselor, Julie Mejia, sent a statement. She cannot be in. I'll read it at the end since she's not here. And she has a list of questions, and if you've answered them already, just say answered and move on to the next question. Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team for being here. Excited for the start of this budget season. I thought that I would start my questions mainly focused on revenue, since we have Todd here today, and I think this is, if I'm right, sort of substituting for, at times we've had a standalone revenue hearing, but this is sort of the revenue hearing. So since I know that I will have a chance to ask departments about their specific investments, I'll probably start there. So one question, Todd, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of where FY22 actuals are clocking in, because all of your comparisons show us FY22 budget and 23 budget, but obviously, as we discussed extensively in last year's budget season, we were really throwing a dart at the wall in terms of our budgets for revenues last year as things were starting to open back up. So I'm kind of curious, obviously we don't have all the money in, but you know, 3/4 of the way through the year where we're landing, because it's a little hard to get a sense of that from these numbers.
Yeah, great question, Councillor. So of course we do traditionally compare the upcoming year's budget to the tax rate budget for the current year. So that is the comparison you see in all the tables in our materials, but yeah, happy to speak to current year a little bit, because yeah, we have been tracking revenue closely, especially those revenues that are you know, most sensitive to economic changes, economic growth. Those were the ones that were impacted most, as I noted in the presentation. So you know, we track these on a sort of constant basis, do monthly reports, and I can say that especially with that local revenue, the most sensitive sources, they are likely to meet or exceed the targets that we've set in the tax rate budget, so the ones that you're comparing to there. So we definitely have seen growth, for instance, in the excise taxes for hotel, for meals, aircraft fuel, and those are rebounding, although again with the caution that there's still a lot of uncertainty, persistent sources of uncertainty. Among those, viral variants, geopolitical events, other macroeconomic pressures. You know, the Fed, we're watching closely what the Fed is doing. So there is some residual caution, even with some encouraging signs in the current year. We want to make sure that we're budgeting conservatively in FY23.
What about new growth? Where is that landing vis-a-vis the 82 number?
We're budgeting $60 million.
No, I know that's in the budget, but I mean for FY22. Whereas, like, we budgeted 82 last year.
Right.
It was 103 the year before. Where are we landing on new gross?
So we actually initially budgeted in FY22 $45 million, so $82 million was where we landed. And in the upcoming year, as Jim mentioned, we're looking at $60 million is what we've budgeted on.
Okay. I think it would be great, this is a request through the chair for information follow-up. I think it would be great for the council to actually get the actuals through May 31st or whatever in the revenue streams that sort of pegged against projections so that people can get a sense of what's recovering and what isn't. I think that's the other side of budgeting. And I totally respect the need to be conservative on the FY23 budget, but I don't think it makes sense for the council to be more than a year in the rear view mirror in terms of what's actually happening. And on charter reimbursement, which is usually a big piece of what lands that state aid number flat, do we have a sense of, I know there was always a question mark in the Student Opportunity Act stuff of whether or not the charter reimbursement piece was going to be fully funded by the governor and legislature. Do you guys have a feel for that? What are you assuming when you say it's going to be net flat?
I think we're cautiously optimistic that it's going to improve the percentage of the charter school reimbursement. But we're far from done, but we think it'll moving in the direction. And just a point of clarification, when we're setting the tax rate, it's actually the Department of Revenue looks at your last year final closing number, because it's sort of, you don't count your chickens until they want proof. And so when we're creating, finalizing the FY22 budget, they're like, well, the last full year number you had was FY21, so that's sort of the comparison that they...
Yeah. No, I totally get why we present it this way. I just think it would be good for the council to have that, further information. And on the non-recurring revenue number that's down 15, so is that including our Arpa dollars from last year?
That's exactly the explanation for that 15, is the change from 55 to 40.
To 40, and what's the other 40?
That's free cash.
Free cash, okay, got it. And then on youth jobs, this is my one substantive question for this round. We've seen again and again that our challenge is not just...
Sorry, you'd have to come back.
Okay, all right, I'll come back in the second round. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Counselor, sorry, I lost my order of arrival. I think it was Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the important work you're doing, Madam Chair, and working closely with the Mayor's administration and finance team that's here. I had an opportunity to work with many of them over the last several years, and they're very dedicated and professional employees, but I also know that you've had great working sessions with them, Madam Chair, so I want to thank you for your hard work as well leading up to this budget process. So I just had one question, one issue that was always a concern to me during this time. A couple issues, but I'll only focus on this one issue. We received a lot of federal money over the last several years, and we're investing heavily in the public school system. So I'm just wondering, as it relates to the HVAC systems, it's an important issue. Many schools don't have air conditions. Many schools don't have proper heating. Are we going to be sure as we head into a school year at the end of August that our schools will have adequate air conditioning and our schools will have proper heating systems in place? Just because we have a lot of federal money, but we also are investing heavily in our schools. It's been a challenge getting this issue right, but I hope it's a top priority for us to have a working HVAC system in every school.
Councilor, you're exactly right. Air quality is one of the most, it really was brought to the forefront through the public health that air quality is tremendously important to maintaining a good, healthy school environment. And through the federal resources available to schools, they prioritized. I would defer to them at their hearings to get the specifics on it, but I know that was a key priority of them to get in HVAC systems. It's become a fundamental component of when a capital project is developed. You know, it does add a significant cost component to a project to fully build out an HVAC system, but we think it's important and very well worth it in the long term.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And maybe through the chair, one of the issues we can highlight when it comes to the BPS is the HVAC. Get an update from the BPS on HVAC systems. I'm going to withhold further questioning to the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration team.
Just someone was just pointed out to me, right? There is a significant investment of $10 million for HVAC inequality in the ESSER dollars as part of the FY23 budget.
Yeah, I noticed that. So the assumption for me would be that all the schools will be fixed, but I don't like to assume that. I don't want to come back again in August and know that there are schools that don't have air conditioning. So I'd rather know about it now. Give us an opportunity to make sure that the money's in the budget so we can fix that going into another school year. So if it's $10 million, then it's $10 million. But I just want to make sure that when we start the school year in August, that they're all fixed. That's my priority. But thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
Thank you, President Flynn. Councilor Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your presentation this morning, and thank you for all the great work. I know a huge amount of work goes into preparing our budget. A few questions. The operating budget, the $71 million to support fair wages and retention of city employees, I'm really concerned about the fact that the cost of living in the city of Boston is high, and we have residency requirements, etc. What I know the budget is the funding to do that, but in terms of strategies to try and are we adequately providing to ensure retention of city employees and retention and recruitment of city employees? And this might be a question for another committee meeting, but
yeah, I want to do my best to channel sort of the labor relations and sort of, you know, the wage pattern that sort of has been agreed to with both labor and administration reflects, you know, what is a agreed upon fair wage but we are very sensitive to the cost of living in housing being the biggest driver of people's cost of living. We're definitely supportive of this significant investment in increasing the number of affordable housing units across the city. So that's part of the strategy, but you know, we definitely are sensitive to that concern.
So then also there's $44 million to increase transformative departmental investments. Have you allocated or identified the priority areas in which those transformative investments? Housing's one.
Yeah, Johanna's presentation on the grouped it in sort of thematic things, but they're across the city, organized by areas of, you know, housing obviously is a huge component of this budget. Mental health supports, we all realize coming off the pandemic that that's an increasingly important element of the budget. But all those things are sort of, you know, spread throughout the city, all those types of investments. Very good.
And then, so when looking at the financial year 2022, the adopted budget we adopted last year, and then the projected budget, and then the difference between the two, it's difficult to understand. Like, can you help me understand why there's a difference between the projected, the increase, the adopted budget, and then the projected budget, the difference between those two?
It was projected in terms of FY21.
And then for 2022, and then obviously going on to 2023, year on year.
Well, the 22 budget reflects the budget approved in tax rate as part of this tax rate setting process in December. There was minor expense adjustments. I think it was basically just, I don't think we had the benefit of the state assessment numbers at the time we adopted the budget, so we trued that up a little bit. But a lot of it is trying to capture new growth and establishing the valuation. So it's not necessarily a projection, that's the budgeted value for 22.
Yeah. Very good. And then, Madam Chair, how am I doing?
1 minute.
1 minute. Quick. Let's see. I think that's all for now. I'll let my next colleague take their turn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lujan?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration for being here. I have just a few questions. One is just in terms of the budget listening sessions. I know that there was idea of a budget prior to that happening. Would like to be given 3 tangible examples of how the budgeting listening sessions actually changed or had an influence on the budget.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
And feel free others to throw in other examples that I might be missing. But yeah, there are a few key takeaways. So one example is actually, well, we're just talking about the operating budget right now, but in the capital budget and the Arpa allocations, which will be discussed in future hearings, there are other additional examples. In the capital budget, we heard a lot during these listening sessions that folks were looking for more open space for the city to pursue, open space acquisition, dog parks. Those are things that have allocations in the capital budget now as a direct result. Johanna highlighted in her overview some public safety investments. One thing that we didn't highlight was an additional $500,000 for
I'm sorry, maybe I missed it, but Johanna, what were those public safety investments? Just if you could repeat it.
So there's, where am I looking? There's actually $100,000 in OPAT for community mediation and a review of police BIPOC data that sort of directly addresses the need for public safety reform, because we heard that loud and clear. There's also not highlighted on this slide, but included in the budget is $500,000 in a staffing analysis review for public safety to make sure that we have the right number of officers in the right places, and that's intended for all public safety. Gabby already mentioned youth jobs and open space.
Yeah, youth jobs is another big one, right? We've heard, from everyone for a long time now, 5,000 summer jobs, and this budget exceeds that goal with 6,000 summer jobs. So those are just a highlight of some examples, but really, we tried to root basically every investment in things that we heard during the listening tour.
That was the other one. Alternative public safety responses to mental health crises. That was far and away our biggest, our first choice for everyone in sort of public safety, making sure that we have an appropriate public response to appropriate mental health needs. For some folks, that's a uniform response. For some, it's not. And so there's funding in the police department as well as the Public Health Commission to look at alternative responses to truly meet those needs. And again, I'm sure both those departments will be happy to speak in more detail.
I think housing is not necessarily, maybe not vocalized as much at the listening sessions, but lots of email traffic and lots of other communication during the budget process.
Great, thank you. I mean, and this is a pilot, so hopefully seeing it expand so that we can get better numbers for across the city, more representative of the city, thinking about along class terms, who has the ability to attend budgeting sessions, how are we getting City Hall out of City Hall there, especially when, the definition of equity here about, every resident, regardless of background, and feel empowered to thrive in Boston. I mean, I challenge that the work is more than that, right? It's about corrective action that we have to take, and if we actually internalize that, that's going to look very different when we do outreach and also in our budget. My second question was about state aid, just curious around, so the state tuition, the charter school reimbursement should increase, I think it says, to about 90%. Which hopefully will be a net increase in what we'll be receiving from the state. I'm curious to know more about the policy decisions at the state level that have really made state money, I don't want to say state aid because we pay so much to the state, and we don't get what we deserve in return. But why has that become so regressive? The policy decisions over the years. Like, I'm curious as a new city councilor, trying to figure out, like, where does the pressure need to be there so that the city of Boston is getting at least what it's giving to the state back, and more of a return for how much the city anchors a state in the state's economy.
Well, I don't want to speak for the state administration, but we definitely echo your sentiments. We wanted to be a more significant part of the city's operating budget. We feel the city is generating that level of resources that contribute to the Commonwealth's budget. So it's, but I wouldn't want to speak for. It's been multiple administrations and legislative bodies that have participated in this. So I don't really know. Couldn't give you the actual policy behind it, other than it's been sort of, I think we're amongst other cities and towns dealing with the same issue.
I think the one thing I might just add is I think historically it was a case where there was divestment around the time of recessions, and then not completely replacing or restoring that funding after recessions at the state level. So that's a dynamic we've seen in the last couple decades.
Thank you. Okay, one more, quick.
You have 53 seconds.
Okay, just last quick question. Are there discussions internally about ways in which other new revenue streams that we are exploring or thinking about on the local level, whether it's, fees that we are able within, our home rule authority to generate, like what are some new things that we are thinking about, even if they're not, haven't risen to the level of we are depending on them in a way that is substantial?
Yeah, I think we're open to in all forms of, we know that we're probably a little over dependent on property taxes. Very stable, very reliable, but it's a big, it's a lot of eggs in one basket. So we're definitely open to that. I mean, I don't know that anything's sort of queued up to submit as part of this budget cycle, but we've looked at all kinds of different revenue sources. I don't know, Todd, if there's anything that pops here.
I mean, I would just say that that's correct, Jim. I think that it's mainly the growth in this budget is rebounding of economic growth and more so than new sources. We're definitely very constrained by the tax authority, limited tax authority we have under the state legal framework. We definitely do assess year-to-year opportunities for new revenue. I will say that one thing that's been top of mind the last couple of years is the fact that we're emerging from a pandemic. The residents and businesses are struggling, so there's been some hesitation to impose new fees or increase fees in that environment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just second, Kenzie asked for some numbers, just so that we're not under projecting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll come back. Thank you. Councilor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. So Jim, like our last 8 years have been good with the AAA bond rating. How far back do they look for your triple? They're not just looking back on last year. Is it a 3-year sort of?
Well, they tend to be looking at your official statement that's associated with the bond prospectus. So I think there's like 5 years of data right in that world. But there is some universality of what they look at. So they do say, are you on top of your pension schedule? Are you like in a situation where you're way behind and it's a big liability? Are you current on your debt issuance outstanding? So those are important things, but just general fiscal management is always, I probably almost overuse it, but it's the equivalent of like the FICO score for a consumer. It's like, are you, it's credit worthiness at the end of the day.
So with that being said, where are we on our pension liability and our OPEB payments? Are we on? I know we were pushed back 1 or 2 years. So it was a couple of years ago. It was 24. We were supposed to be level funded on our pension. So you can talk about that a little bit. And so, are we seeing anything in the forecast for our AAA in 3 years? Say, is there anything happening now that may affect that in 2 or 3 years?
Nothing that's been made apparent. Obviously, they see the same things that all of us see, that we're very dependent on property taxes. So as long as the property tax base stays strong, I think we're fairly well
And do they look at incoming, the revenue streams like the
Absolutely.
excess? So if that starts to waver, that could affect us?
Sure. There are things, all kinds of management issues that they sort of evaluate, or structural issues that might be impacting the city.
Yeah. So retirement, where are we now?
So we're going to, the schedule will be fully funded, although, you never fully funded. It's
No, I know, but
revalid every
our
year.
previous liabilities.
Yep.
So is it 40 million a year we're putting into that, or 25 million?
No, the pension appropriation is 300 and,
No,
No,
that
OPEB.
we, so it's the OPEB that we're putting the 40 million in.
Exactly.
And that's not pension liability?
that is a post-retirement benefit, and we have not been required to develop a schedule yet. We think that's on the horizon, that you have to build a schedule for it, and that's sort of the shift that we've been talking about for a long time, to say once we get the pension liability under control, we'll shift.
And that will be under control 25, 26?
2027.
27, so it's actually pushed out a couple of years.
Yep.
Okay, so the budget growth was 216 million. We went through some of the places where that's going to happen. 5.7% growth. What is in our schools now, 1.6 billion? So what is the dollar amount investment into the schools over last year? 40 million?
$40 million increase, right?
Okay, and that's basically just operating. Are we getting anything else for that 40 million, or?
Well, it's investments associated with that, so let me just have education opened here.
And are all the contracts done over at the schools?
No.
They're up this year?
Yep, they need to be worked on.
So they're already up?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that's, the teachers' union contract obviously is the biggest.
So that when that all happens, that's not reflective in this 40 million, that's an investment right now this year?
It's part of the collective bargaining reserve. That's at $71 million in growth.
So that's reflective on the pie chart here?
Yes.
The schools?
Schools is part of that collective bargaining reserve.
Okay, so that'll come out of the reserve, okay. We did the AAA, yeah, like some of the transformative investments, getting the small things right. I know we're like, what exactly does that mean, getting the small things right? Like, how do you invest and get it? Shouldn't we be already doing that? Shouldn't that be part of like the city mantra already, the streets, the parks, the playgrounds? Like, that's,
Yeah,
I mean, I have a word for it, but I'm not gonna.
Yeah, it's sort of like making sure you don't take your eye off that. That is a requirement to get if you
And
don't.
we're gonna do investments to make sure that people are doing their jobs?
It's part of making investments to make sure that this small quality of life things that are like core, even maybe support services. Joanna, if you want to.
Yeah, and climate and resilience, 1.5 million.
Right.
Thank you, Councilor Baker.
Thank you.
No worries. Councilor Worrell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel. In the equity and city contract and executive order, every department was required to develop and submit a plan for racial and gender conscious goals and procurement. Any update on those plans?
Well, I would defer to the Economic and Opportunity Cabinet and Inclusion Cabinet, but the Budget Office was involved in assembling departmental buying plans, and that's part of the strategy to increase the amount of MWBE participants in the city's purchasing, so to make that available for prospective contractors. And also, it's part of our budget discussion. Are there opportunities to look at the way work is executed? Is there a way to restructure things that might make it a stronger opportunity for a small local minority or women-owned business to bid on it?
All right, and then is there like a list of questions that each department has to go through when they're submitting, their budget request? And is there an amount, that they request that you could share with the council?
There's not necessarily a list of questions they need to respond to, but it's sort of, there are sort of we think of the budget in sort of, sort of getting the small things right, the sort of the baseline level of services, what you're delivering now, how much does that cost in the following fiscal year. We're working to, incorporate more performance metrics to say, you're delivering this on time, or if you're falling behind in this, if there's a backlog building in this area, what level of resources you'd need to increase that. In some of those, so we sort of hash out sort of the core level of service rolled forward for a future year cost. So some of it has some inflationary impact, some of it is labor-based. I mean, the vast majority of departmental budgets are people, so it's highly influenced by labor costs going forward. But sort of through the investment request, we do ask it to say what populations are you serving, who's going to benefit from this investment, and those are sort of questions that we talk through with them as they put forth their proposals. And they're happy to talk about it at the budget hearings as.
And is this a document that they have to submit? And then is there like a request amount versus what's actually being?
Well, it's less. It tends to be an evolving conversation about sizing the investment request. So it's not necessarily. To be honest with you, your budget officers always have this reputation of all the stuff you say no to, but it's not necessarily no in most cases. It's like, how can we work together to get to the right proposal that fits? And so it's a very iterative process. There's a lot of back and forth with departments, so it's not a clean sort of, they got this. It's a conversation throughout the process, and the Wu administration really brought a lot of voices to this conversation. So we were having cabinet folks come in and talk about it, and about what their proposal was and who was serving and how it integrated with other resources. So it was a really dynamic process the whole period.
All right, and that's not outlined anywhere, correct?
No.
All right, and then residential versus commercial. I'm not sure if we're in a hybrid state. Are we, in terms of like the tax rate and our revenue, are we going to be less reliant on commercial or?
Well, you raise an excellent point. So the part of with you guys' participation, we try to maximize the residential exemption, and the tax burden tends to fall on the commercial industrial. Although the levy tends to be consistent in terms of its allowable growth. So even though, a property owner might, make an argument for their value, individual values, although abatements are relatively a record low. So I think we're, the assessing to their credit, are doing a pretty good job of doing that valuation. So one of the tough parts about Proposition 2.5, and one of the positive things is you can grow your overall levy. It doesn't, individual property owners are not, it's not, but you can grow your overall levy by 2.5% every year.
And then seeing that, 73% of our city revenue is property taxes, is there any, relief for the homeowners in this budget?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of it is subject to state law, but there are relief for seniors, different elements. I don't know, Todd, if you have any.
Yeah, so on top of the residential exemption, which Boston maxes out the kind of maximum allowable 35% of equivalent to 35% of the sort of average value of a Class 1 residential parcel. So maximum residential exemption, as Jim was saying, we weight the commercial and residential fully in favor of residential. But then the other option, which you were referring to, is people do have the opportunity to apply for certain personal exemptions. Seniors, people undergoing economic hardship, and through that process, they can be released from paying part or all of their property taxes.
Thank you, Councilor Rowe. Councilor Ara?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. Good morning, all of you. So I have a few questions around the youth jobs budget first. Thank you, first of all, for including the 6,000 summer jobs and the 1,500 year-round jobs. This is a fight that's been ongoing for well over 15 years, and this is the first time that the City of Boston has not only met the request but exceeded it. With that said, there is about what looks like 12.6 million for emergency employees and contracted services, and then another million on top of that that comes from outside of the state. How did you calculate? So it looks like it's basically 13.6 million for the youth jobs. Can you talk a little bit about how you calculated that amount?
There's a
difference.
So in the nuance between emergency employees versus contracted services, so there are jobs that are hired through Success Link program where they're on the city's payroll system, just like all of us here. And then there are opportunities for them to grant to CBOs who are willing to handle the onboarding and payroll processing. So that would run through the contracted services line. So it's a function of we need to consider minimum wage. So that the budget goes up automatically based on the minimum wage change, which I think was it 14.75 or 14.50 or something like that. Yeah, and then obviously, it's a calendar year base, so we'd have to consider for school year jobs in January. So all of those elements are used to sort of develop the budget. And the state resources, the Youth at Risk grant that we get from the Commonwealth is sort of an estimate of what the state will provide, and it often is allocated across different organizations as well.
Okay, well, my question is more along the lines of the amount. So the 13.6 million seems lower than what we would anticipate that level of youth jobs for the summer and year round. So more so how you're calculating the total cost.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's an element of, and it's pretty common amongst city departments, so we don't fund every single position for 52 weeks a year every year because, there's a certain amount of attrition and turnover. The same is true with youth jobs. So, you might budget it for 6 weeks, and, a teen or youth has a opportunity for some other youth engagement for 2 weeks of it. That might be part of it. Any number of different things. So
there was some analysis done to like the actual cost of the program,
right?
Where based on attrition, how many people drop off, how much you actually spend during the summer, that the 13.6 number felt like the correct one for the jobs.
Right. And I appreciate you bringing up the concept that we sort of exceeded because at the listening session, what we were hearing is to reach the 5,000 jobs. So when we went to 6,000, I think that is a real aspirational goal for us.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why I asked about the number, because given that you've exceeded it, I wanted to know that the number was correct. And so for the year-round jobs, are they going to go from September to June instead of November to May? Have you expanded that?
I will defer to youth engagement and employment on that because I think there are some dynamics that cause them issues to not have it start on September. But
okay. And the eligibility for the youth jobs program, was that expanded at all? I know that currently there are like some 14-year-olds who are eligible. There was also a request to expand it to going up from 14 to 22 because that's the age that BPS goes up to, and right now basically all BPS students are not eligible for the youth jobs program. So was the age eligibility extended at all?
I think through the city's operating budget, I think the parameters might be the same, but I think through the American Rescue Plan from a previous appropriation, there's a youth jobs program that goes out to age 24.
Okay.
That's underway.
Okay, great. How do I do on time, Madam Chair?
35 seconds.
Okay, last question is, do you have the breakdown of the 79 million for collective bargaining? How much of the 79 million is going to each department? And what is the extra 3 million in the Boston Police Department for contracted services? That's an increase.
So for collective bargaining, so how it gets allocated to department is sort of as contracts are settled. That's when it's assigned out to departments. So it's not, we don't we don't present it that way at this point, because it is subject to negotiation.
So it's allocated but not split up between what, until the contracts are
Until
finalized?
the contract is settled, ratified, and put before City Council.
And the $3 million in the
Thank you.
contracted services? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We'll do a second round. Welcome, Councilor Murphy, who's joined us. have
Thank
the
you.
floor.
Yeah, no, just happy to be here. I'm going to hold off on any questions at this time.
Okay,
Thank you.
no worries. So, I mean, my questions are to anyone that can answer. And Bach, you took my question number 4 and question number 5. Thank you. As we're speaking about revenue and diversifying our income streams, have we looked at the overriding proposition? And by that I mean, 2.5% to readjust the base tax rate formula to include new construction costs, plus assess sales prices.
So the city has not availed itself of the Proposition 2.5 override process to date, but in terms of capturing new growth, that is an annual process, which through the assessor, and a lot of times people just associate it with sort of towers, and that's the easiest thing to point to is like a brand new tower that translates to a lot of new property tax revenue, but it's all economic, renovations and expansions and all kinds of construction activity. So that is, and it's been very helpful to support the budget is new growth for many years. Especially with all the luxurious development coming in, right? I mean. Yeah, well, it's been supportive of a lot of the programs, the new growth component of the budget. Can you speak to the overall operation budget in terms of allocation for professional development? Professional, I do not have that, but it's often, there is a set of it that's budgeted in the HR department with tuition reimbursements and other programmatic activities. The city is just coming off of the racial equity training program that was run out of Mayor's Office of Racial Equity. But in terms of individual departments, there is professional development in different areas, whether it be a certain software, or we often send folks up to the IG training for procurement law to make sure that they're following. Overall, do you have a budget on that? Not a central one. We can certainly try to pull that together. Thank you. Councilor Lujan mentioned a bit about the training or the listening sessions that you guys did. And I mean, 500 people for the entire city of Boston, great effort. I enjoyed them. I thought they were great. The surveys, obviously disproportionately inequitable, and the responses disproportionately inequitable. So I wonder though, what your definition of equity? What is that? Like, I heard you speaking about that in your presentation. Could you speak more about what does equity mean exactly for the city of Boston? In terms of resource allocation? In terms of resource allocation. Yeah, it's the right. So there are. It's when you're thinking about like education. It's something that is fairly straightforward. Every student doesn't cost exactly the same. So if a student has, and they're bringing in all kinds of different elements beyond just special ed, and so it's low income, English language learners. So I think everybody is supportive of additional resources to support that kind of, to get the educational, to decrease educational gaps amongst populations that, in that case, your resources need to be enhanced. And I think that's how we view it. And we're saying it's not perfect. It's an iterative process. We look for all kinds of participants. I know there's lots of discussion of like beyond surveys, beyond listening sessions, because, you know, there are a lot of folks who it's very skewed to people who use technology, and maybe, you know, is to go out to people. I know the mayor's desire was to have us out in the districts with you guys at a location of your choice, but it, you know, the pandemic sort of prohibited that type of outreach. But because there's all kinds of input.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I saw everyone nodding when I said that the surveys were obviously disproportionately or just represented, did not reflect the demographics of the city of Boston. And we all nodded because we agree we got a lot of work to do. If that's the case, then what the responses therefore did not represent the city of Boston. But you also said that you responded, that this budget was a response to the listening sessions. Why would we respond to something that we know is lopsided?
I can jump in and just add. So one thing I mentioned was we really took this feedback from the public into account holistically, right? So it's not like we said X percentage of survey respondents wanted us to do this thing and then we did it, right?
Tell me what you mean by holistically.
Meaning that when we looked at the data from the survey, when we looked at the notes that we took, the Zoom chat messages from the listening tour, we looked at the, you know, what race someone identified as, what gender someone identified as, what age someone was. And we're looking at different, okay, if we filter out this race, if we filter out this age to see if there were differences between different people who identify in different ways. Because you're right, there's, for example, 60% of survey respondents were white. Those who, again, who chose to identify their race. Some respondents chose not to identify their race. Obviously, 60% of the population of the city is not white. And so we didn't, again, just want to say, well, this is representative, so we're going to match perfectly. We tried to take into account not only the survey results, not only the listening tour feedback, but also just the feedback that we hear from ONS, right? We are in communication with ONS, we're in communication with departments. They're the content experts. They are the ones who are going out to the community, the Parks Department, BTD, every department holding, you know, regular public meetings and speaking to constituents. So we're really taking into, like, this was a really strong component, obviously, of the budget, but it was not the only place where we got public feedback.
In a typical meeting, how many people would you say attend those meetings?
You mean just public meetings generally?
The departments that you mentioned?
Yeah, I would have to defer to them. It's really random. I mean, I've been to housing meetings where hundreds of people have shown up. I've been to housing meetings where 2 people showed up, so it really varies.
It's safe to say less than 200 people each meeting. I go to a lot of them. And so considering, right, we're talking a very low ratio of the demographics. And so if we're listening to something that we know unfairly represents Boston, then I question that judgment. I wonder then,
well,
how is that transformative? How is that fair?
Well, you know, if that was the only import, that wouldn't be an effective way to. But we have multiple feedback loops, and this isn't our first time of trying to look at that phenomenon. And you probably know better than I about going to a community meeting that there are certain advocacies that tend to drown out a lot of the people who need to be heard. So as professional, you know, people in government, you have to be able to see through sort of strong advocacy to say.
So we agree then that the numbers does not represent demographics, and the demographics of the meeting, the people does not reflect the actual population of the city of Boston. We also know that we have a lot of work to do. So we know that we have not engaged Boston. We have engaged a very small portion of people that have access, that typically show up, and that's okay. I think we agree. Councilor Burrell mentioned, asked a question that was not answered, and I was really interested in that. Of the requests that you get from departments, there's a list of different requests that you get. Can we get a copy of the things that were not responded to?
I think everything is responded to, but what I think I responded to Councilor Burrell is it's some of it is just it's an iterative question. Sometimes there are things that are like, may be duplicate. And that's the benefit of everything going through a central clearinghouse, because you also want coordination amongst investments. And so it's sometimes it's working together with multiple departments on an initiative, and also maximizing your resources. So does it belong in the operating budget? Does it belong in the capital budget? Does it belong in an external resource? So those are the types of dynamics that are going on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. There were several departments that experienced, or at least it looks like their personnel lines were reduced for fiscal year, for this fiscal year actually, budget. Are you able to speak to these? And I have some examples in terms of Fair Housing Commission had a reduction in their personal budget about $100,000, and BCYF Administration and Policy and Youth and Families reduction in their personnel budget about $370,000. Environmental had a reduction in personnel budget of about $450,000. Can you speak to that, please?
So we can. The Environment Department's actually an easy one. We created the Landmarks Commission, and so there was about a little over $1 million that you will actually see now reflected, and that's mixed between personnel and non-personnel, that you'll actually see reflected in the, Office of Historic Preservation, which includes the Landmarks Commission. So that explains the Environment Department. I will double check. I am 90% certain that the Office of Fair Housing was actually a result of moving funding from permanent employees into contracted services. They realized that the things they wanted to do, the sort of housing testing that they do, was better suited for contracted services than an employee.
Yeah, and that wasn't cutting positions, like existing positions that are filled or anything. That was funding that was already in their budget that they weren't utilizing to the fullest extent, and realized that it would be better suited as a contracted service.
Thank you.
And BCYF, so one of the things we do is take a very close, hard look at everyone's permanent employees and their personnel. And this actually relates to the salary savings model. So BCYF had a large number of vacancies. They had a lot of turnover, a lot of turmoil turnover in the past year. And so we're just looking at the positions they have and making sure that they can adequately staff everything. That was the number that they ended up being at. And we are very confident in that number, even though it is a decrease.
I'm interested in the youth engagement and employment. There is a reduction in personnel, but an increase in contract roles. So can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, that's the model of implementing the youth job. So when they do sort of a grant agreement with a CBO to handle fully onboarding the youth into the job. So in order to increase the number of youth jobs overall, they're trying different approaches to doing it. So if there are challenges getting the youth through the city's onboarding system, they want to leverage the opportunities where CBOs have that capacity. So they would take it out of emergency employees, which would be on the city's payroll, and grant it to a CBO directly to hire the youth.
Thank you. I'll hold off the rest of the questions. I do have to read Councilor Mejir's statements or questions. Dear Madam Chair and members of Ways and Means, I am writing to inform you of my absence during today's City Council hearing on Dockets 0480 to 0486 FY23 A&F budget overview. Due to a scheduling conflict, I am unable to attend at this. As this is the first budget hearing of the season, I would like to thank you, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, for your leadership as the chair of Ways and Means, especially in the fight towards achieving equity in our city budget. I would also like to take this opportunity to enter a few questions into the record, with which I hope to follow up with the panelists for answers. In regards to the 6,000 new, again, if they've been answered, just state that, please. 6,000 new youth summer jobs and the 100,000 year-round jobs. What are we doing to guarantee that these positions will pay a livable wage?
So, do you want me to answer those, Councillor? Or
do you think it's been answered?
Unfortunately, the youth jobs are based on the minimum wage, not necessarily a livable wage. You know, so a lot of the youth are obviously living with their families, but.
Thank you. Are we partnering with local workforce development, nonprofits, unions, and community-based organizations to ensure that these jobs lead to profitable careers?
That's an excellent point. So one of the components of the youth jobs is called Learn and Earn. So it is a partnership with our Office of Workforce Development to get youth engaged in skill sets that will help them long-term to enter the workforce.
Thank you. In addition, are these jobs for youth aged 18 and under?
The city's appropriation, it tends to cover that age demographic, 15 to 18.
Any word on increasing the line item for youth jobs aged 19 to 24?
Well, there's a fairly significant American Rescue Plan investment for that demographic, which is underway. So that, I guess the answer is yes to that.
The executive summary describes a $20 million line item for arts and culture that will help with placemaking. A lot of people online have reached out to our office to figure out what placemaking is. Could you define it for us?
Okay. Placemaking, I have a little familiarity with it because there were some winter placemaking events that occurred. And it's basically an activation of a public space to bring folks together. You know, coming out of a pandemic, there's a lot of social isolation that's occurred where people, you know, so they were basically art installations, some food was provided, some other activities. You know, I think there was like 4 different locations chosen for the winter placemaking. You know, the downside of doing it in the winter is you're subject to weather and things like that, but I think they overall went well.
I'll also add that I think that number specifically refers to the Arpa allocation for arts and culture, which will be discussed at future Arpa City Council hearings.
Thank you. For clarification, what you described, Jim, I think is just activating space, and placemaking could be temporary lease with the City of Boston, city-owned lot or not, or private, in terms of there could actually be construction and actually creating something out of that space. And then placekeeping would be the process of opportunities like such as land trust or other that could go into actual ownership or RFP opportunities for developers or entrepreneurs or artists. And okay, so then I think, is this Julia? In regards to the $15 million line item for increasing early childhood education workforce, what are we doing to ensure that the new workforce we hire represents the diversity of our young students?
Again, that's another American Rescue Plan appropriation. So I'll sort of defer that to that hearing.
To that hearing, thank you. I do have to read it, I'm sorry. Are we planning on reaching out to any of the daycare or early childhood education care centers, care providers that were shut down as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I think also as part of the operating budget, there is a Child Care Entrepreneurs Fund to stabilize and reactivate the small neighborhood-based daycares.
How are we ensuring that these care providers receive a livable wage?
I think that's part of the strategy to increase the quality of childcare is to ensure that the wages are higher. I know that's one of the definitions of quality universal pre-K is making sure that the teaching staff has at least a bachelor's degree and makes a wage akin to the Boston Teachers Union wage pattern.
Thank you. Part of the referendum voted on in 2021 was to create a participatory budget office which would oversee funds voted on by the community. That process will likely begin in the coming years. So how are we thinking about using FY23 to lay the groundwork for the future process?
That's an excellent question and comment, and the budget does include an additional, we've doubled the amount. So the FY22 budget sort of laid out an appropriation in the absence of even.
For the record, what was the original amount?
It was $1 million in FY20.
And we've doubled it to
And then
2 million?
yeah, to 2, exactly.
Thank you.
And so the office is to be created collaboratively with the city council, so.
Thank you again to the chair, the members of the committee, the administration, my colleagues, and our central staff liaisons. A representative from my staff will be listening and following up with me. I look forward to reviewing the footage and following up as needed. Sincerely, Councilor Julia Mejia. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for your wonderful questions. I'd like to move ahead with our public testimony for round 1. First, we have Will Justice and Ms. Johanna Hines and Ms. Pamela Miles. Mr. Justice, I welcome, and you have 2 minutes.
All right, peace. So I'm here with the Friends of Malcolm X Park, and we're speaking on the budget that's going into, like, you know, tearing down our trees, and we're not too happy about that. Because especially since they did not have a whole process of how it's going to cost the city more to remove these trees rather than to just leave them alone. And we didn't ask for this. I mean, really, we really didn't ask for this. And on top of, we could have figured out a way if there was a better community process to actually preserve our trees and keep it ADA accessible and make sure that it's like environmentally sound. Because, I mean, even the soccer players who are saying that they would rather prefer no AstroTurf and keep it on regular grass, and the budget has put all this money into something that, like I said, we did not ask for. And on top of this, it's like we are asking for y'all to review the whole community process in the way that you're dealing with Roxbury, because a lot of the times you're throwing money at things that, you know, could be going towards other things and actually help the community. I mean, and it's like you're not even notifying the community. You need to know what's going on and actually ask us how, you know, we would like these things to be spent. You know, it's a really kind of screwed up process. How it's done, it's like we're being dictated to instead of asked, hey, how would you like to use this resource? I mean, and they're just telling us what they're gonna do. And frankly, we don't believe that they're building for us, the people of the community. They're building for other people who they're trying to bring into the community. And it's like, this is, no, not the very best process.
Thank you, Mr. Justice.
All right, babe.
Thank you. Ms. Johanna Hines? Ms. Pamela Miles?
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak. This morning, we came here to this budget hearing because the Parks Department budget is being discussed, and there's an $8.8 million budget for the Malcolm X Park that includes what Mr. Justice just referred to around toxic turf placement, as well as the removal of legacy trees, while the City of Boston has, and the mayor have decided that not one old growth tree should be removed from the City of Boston because of the climate crisis. The International Panel of Climate Change of the United Nations has declared that we are in a crisis and heading for a catastrophe. Our community of Roxbury, where I live across the street from this park, will be negatively impacted by the removal of trees. These trees, the community has been working very hard to come up with an alternative to how the tree issue is addressed and how ADA compliance can be maintained, which could be something that could be added into the budget. And I know we're not in participatory phase at this point, but we came up with an idea to actually add scooter loans out so that people can navigate a hill with slopes so that all people can access this park. The removal of trees and I know I'm going to run out of time any second now. The removal of trees will impact the environment in a negative way. This area, we have the City of Boston has also produced a heat map of how the resiliency of our communities is laid out as it relates to heat, urban heat islands, and there is an urban heat island there, but if you look on the map, the place where the trees are currently is blue. Removal of these trees to add things like amphitheaters and going through trees instead of around them. They want to remove now 29, which is down from 54. So I didn't just come to talk about the trees, but how our budget is being managed, how the Parks Department budget is being allocated such that we do not have a plan in place for the maintenance of the trees in that park after this. Yes, ma'am. After this, there's only 3 of us, and I'm sure that there was more time allocated for public testimony. And I will be leaving here, and that's why I'm speaking out of turn. The allocation of this $8.8 million park improvement does not have anything to actually maintain the park at the level that it should be after this quote-unquote improvement is done. The AstroTurf that was
Ms. Miller,
designed to be...
Can you wrap up in 30 seconds?
Yes, ma'am. The AstroTurf that we're asking, which will present a harm to our community, is something that was designed for indoors, and they want to put it on an outdoor field rather than using sod, which would be cheaper and easier to maintain than a plastic top that will kill all of the life that's under that field and toxify and poison our groundwater. And I have 2 great-grandchildren, and that should not happen because they're going to inherit this legacy. So I'm asking that it be reconsidered, that you look at the Parks Department budget and see how these things are being allocated. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Ms. Johanna Hines? I think so. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Joanna Hines, and I just wanted to also thank Councillor Lujan for asking for 3 tangible examples to be given based on that survey. And Madam Chair, thank you for also asking more questions about that. Less than 1% of Boston's population is not a significant amount and should not be considered real information as far as what the people want. So, I was wondering more about the public health piece of this pie and how much is allocated to that, because if the city really does consider extreme heat and asthma to be issues that are within the realm of public health, how can we also be taking away one of our greatest natural assets, mature tree canopy that exists, even though it's dwindling by the day? How can the city knowingly take away an asset that is doing a job which has the potential to keep us safe from extreme heat and to help the kids in environmental justice neighborhoods that are already struggling and suffering from asthma and other respiratory illnesses? As far as extreme heat, just the other day, Mayor Wu was written about in her Heat Resilience Solutions for Boston and identified Roxbury as one of the top neighborhoods of concern. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's a joke that the city is going into a park in Roxbury named after Malcolm X, designed by the Olmsted brothers the week of Arbor Day, Malcolm X's birthday, and Olmsted's 200th anniversary, and wants to chop down trees and add more impermeable surfaces. The jury is out on the dangers of turf. The Massachusetts website, .gov, is doing research as we speak. The World Cup has just told Robert Kraft to rip up the turf and put down real grass because real soccer players don't want the staph infections, the burns, the blisters on the bottoms of their feet, or all that other stuff that's being ingested. I think they know what they're talking about. So how about the city stops ripping up natural green land and putting plastic green carpet in its place. That makes no sense. It's almost a joke. Finally, I mean, this is a question, I'm probably crazy to ask it on film. How much of this total budget is going to line the pockets of the concrete industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Okay. We had someone sign up virtually, and they're not here yet. Thank you so much to the community for your public testimony. We'll go to round two. Councillor Bach, I think it's your turn for round two.
Great, thanks so much, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up on the youth jobs questions. Again, super excited about the expansion, and also excited, I think it's important for councilors to know that bulk sum that allows some of the organizations to just administer the jobs directly without going through our city employment process was very much a long-term ask that we had been pushing for, because it does simplify it for a bunch of our organizations. That said, I'm sort of curious about the back end side, because we all know that every year the challenges of actually filling all the youth jobs that we offer, however many, some of that is outreach, but some of that is the extensive process of the ones that do come through the city system, folks needing to get signed up as city employees. And we frequently see, it's one thing if a youth comes and does 4 weeks of our summer job program because they found another opportunity. A lot of times they're just sitting in our back end queues, not getting signed up until 2 weeks in. And when my office hosted Success Link Youth, we saw that happening in real time. So I'm sort of curious as we think about putting more folks through that throughput, even though we've diversified the throughputs by adding the grants, sort of what are our investments in the back end? Because it always felt like there was a bit of a kind of HR department challenge there, and just it's a lot more people to onboard than normally. And then kind of similarly on the grant side, heard from a lot of community partners excitement about that, but also it got introduced very late in the cycle last year. And so I think folks felt like, having that administered in the way that was going to work for them and making sure there was enough of a buffer to support the administrative costs on their end was a challenge. So I'd love to hear the sort of boring but important part of this, if you can talk a little more about that.
Good point, Councillor. So the new approach where they sort of do a mix of both the traditional onboarding through the city's Success Link program and then granting out has met with success, and they were able to hire more staff. We, as part of this budget, although it's not going to impact this summer, it's going to be long-term, is we're adding an FTE for youth outreach. So I think some of the feedback we got, particularly from the mayor's feedback generally, is like beyond it being, it needs sometimes the personal touch to just basically go out, a younger person talking to youth about jobs and opportunities would go a long way. But we also are including advertising because we know that will work as well. But I think we're well positioned to do both the back end part by onboarding the folks every year. There's improvements, but there's no other hiring element in the city where that many people get throughput the system at the same time.
But to that point, Jim, did you guys make any change in the back end HR side piece? Because my sense was, we were process diagramming it. There was all kind of, it's not like we haven't recognized it's a problem, but.
Right. I think there's been a stepped up effort of coordination. There's been coordination ongoing all year long with folks sort of getting ready for it. So,
so I guess I would just lodge that as a question for YE is going to come back to us, but it's not just a question for YE. I'm asking it of you guys because it's an HR, city systems, how are we supporting? Right. I just think it would be a pity to do this amazing thing that the mayor's doing. I know it's going to be a more formal announcement this afternoon, right? And really surge us on youth jobs and then not be able to process people.
Right.
My other question kind of related, engineers, amazing to see you guys proposing to hire 12 folks. It's super, when you dig into the weeds as a counselor of why projects that you want to see happen for street safety are not happening, it's always because we've got way too few engineers on deck right now, and we've had vacant positions and stuff. So I guess my question is, okay, we're adding those positions, but have you guys done a real comp survey, et cetera, to kind of make sure that we're actually going to be able to competitively hire engineers in this environment? Because my sense is that we're losing them to the private sector constantly.
Yeah, it's a dynamic throughout the enterprise where it's a labor, it's sort of an employee centric at this point. So, but I think the Streets Cabinet feels confident that they have the resources to recruit these folks and put them on the teams and have the structure in place to start implementing these projects at the level that you desire.
And can you guys speak to changes in the mayor's office and the city council budget for the fiscal year?
Sure. We can start with the mayor's office, I guess.
So I should have explained that second rounds of 3 minutes. Please answer that question and we'll move on. Councilor Block, you've had 5 minutes. If this is okay with you, we'll move on after that.
So included in the FY23 budget for the mayor's office is something put forward by a New Urban Mechanic supporting an Indigenous Communities Fellow. There's an announced investment in a senior advisor for early childhood, chief of planning, advisor in the Green New Deal. All of these sort of cumulatively is responsible for the growth in the mayor's office budget. In terms of city council, there was additional technology requested. I think the budget also includes an ordinance change. I think it was August of 2021, where the pool sizes available for city councils were increased, and central staff compensation was addressed. But there was requests from the city council for additional technology and additional resources for language and communication access.
Great, great. And it would be great if we don't have it, just to have a breakdown of the mayor's office side, because I know the council president can furnish us on our side, but just to be good to understand.
Thank you, Councilor Block. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, I want to say thank you to you, Madam Chair, and the panelists for being here and their important work. One issue that I've focused on almost since I came here over the last 4 years is swimming pools in BCYF facilities / BPS facilities. In fact, this Wednesday, joining Councilor Lara and Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, calling for a hearing on providing swimming lessons to students in BPS, students in BCYF, students across Boston, kids of color and young kids with disabilities. But I guess my question is, what are we doing to fix up swimming pools in city buildings? That's a critical issue. It's an important issue. It's a public health issue, a public safety issue, and it's something as I mentioned, I've focused on for 4 years, but we have a lot of federal money that's coming into the city, and we have a large city budget. Is this something we're going to tackle this year to make sure that our pools are fixed so young kids are able to go swimming and get swimming lessons? And as we know, more kids of color drowned than anyone else. So it's really critical we teach swimming at the earliest age to all kids in Boston.
Thank you, Council. The swimming pools obviously are a component of the capital budget. We can get you more details on swimming pool investments as part of the capital budget. And in the actual operation of staffing with lifeguards and developing youth swimming programs at BCYF, that always is a important component. Aquatics is a huge component of the budget, particularly seasonally when they open up the seasonal pools. So we can definitely make sure that at BCOF's hearing on the 16th of May to be prepared to address aquatics and aquatic programs, and we will also work on the level of investment on swimming pools through the capital plan.
Thank you, Jim. And then my final question is another issue I've really focused on because my constituents demand that I focus on it is pedestrian safety in my district, but it's really across the city. So my question is, are we giving the city departments enough funding that they're able to make these changes, pedestrian safety infrastructure changes?
You know, part of this 12 staff augmentation to the streets cabinet is to do just that, is to be able to, in there, it's a multi-faceted approach to implementing pedestrian safety as part. So there's all kinds of different ways to approach it, and they're looking to try to streamline the process to come up with the most effective way to do it. So we think that a significant investment was made this year to help support that effort.
Thank you.
Capital and ARPA funding for slow streets, walkable streets, just general pedestrian safety that, again, will be talked about in more detail at the future hearings.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Braden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few quick things. The pilot assessment, did the reassessment of the real estate holdings of our nonprofits in the city, has that been completed? And how much of the property in Boston at this stage is tax exempt? And how much do we actually bring in from pilot assessment? And that's my first question.
I know that we bring in $30 million from pilot agreements. In terms of the tax exempt percentages, 40% sounds about right, but I could be wrong.
That may be right. But we need to get back to you, I think, on a more precise answer.
Thank you. And then also, in terms of grant-making capacity, are we able to access, do we have the infrastructure at the departmental level to pursue discretionary and competitive grants from the federal government or from the state? This is really particularly in the light of the money that might be available from the President Biden's infrastructure law. So just really, I've heard from some departments that they need the support to get grants. To write grants and they're leaving a lot of money on the table according to these folks. And then also, when we do get the grants, it's an embarrassment when we have to give the money back because we don't have the staff available to actually implement the program that we got the grant for. So that's really something, it's of great concern. And if you any comments on that issue?
No, we think that's key to particularly competitive-based grants going forward. I think in terms of infrastructure, these same engineering staff would probably be employed in addition to their day-to-day work, but supporting the sort of technical analysis that needs to go into an infrastructure proposal. So we think that's a good investment that will leverage future competitive federal resources. A huge announcement for Blue Hill Ave. I think it's a $14 million grant. It's going to be like an overall $40 million program for Blue Hill Ave, of which like $15 million is coming through the federal government.
Very good. And then also, we mentioned earlier that funding's been underutilized or not utilized to its full extent because of staff shortages, and that then we end up contracting out that project or whatever. To what extent are departments unable to use the appropriated funds that we appropriate and due to staff vacancies, and that we're forced then to seek outside contractors to do the work?
Well, it depends on the type of work being considered. There's some things you really can't outsource. It's a core city function that you need to have. And through the pandemic, Boston is not like on a lot of employers where there is service interruptions and challenges with filling positions that Also with the transition, obviously there are situations, but I think we're coming out of that phase, and positions are starting to be filled, I think we're in a good position to take advantage of resources going forward. That's sort of the underlying,
Thank you.
Sure.
Madam Chair, also in terms of the filling of a position, how long does it take
Council Brayden,
Madam,
welcome back to you.
sorry, beg your
Thank
pardon.
you. Thank you so much.
Just filling those positions is really critical.
Did you want to finish now? Do you want to wrap it up now?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. May I? I think one of the issues that we hear about as well is that when a position is posted, that there's a long process to filling the job, and that very often interested candidates actually it's a very competitive job market, that they actually go somewhere else, and we miss the opportunity to hire that very talented person to help us. So I think we need to smooth out our processes to make that more efficient. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Lujan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks again to the administration for being here and for answering the questions. The section on BCYF and the increase in funding was a bit confusing in the book, just so it says that it says FY22 budget will increase by 2.2% overall from FY21. I don't know if those are just like the years are wrong or if the budget increase is wrong, but just.
We wouldn't be talking about 22 increasing, so that seems like it might have been a typo or
yeah,
something.
so I'd like to get, do we know what the BCYF increase is?
We sure do, yep.
It's both related to Councillor Flynn's point about, we've seen in recent months, last month, about the closure of swimming pools in our neighborhoods, especially in our Black and brown neighborhoods, and want to make sure that we are investing money to keep those open, to make sure that folks have activities and are able to access those swimming pools, and that we are hiring lifeguards. So I want to know what that increase, what the actual increase looks like for BCYF.
BCYF is 23 over 22 is actually a slight decrease. It's essentially flat. They're down 0.25%, or about 73,000. And again, that's sort of just looking at that salary numbers and sort of the positions they're able to fill, how fast they're able to fill them. I think we're all aware of lifeguard shortages, which speaks to the swimming pools issue, speaks to the hiring issue. And I know that BCYF is doing their absolute best to staff up for this summer right now. But we sort of doing the math and the analysis, that's what it looks like. This also, again, I believe Councillor Baker asked about it, does not include any collective bargaining yet. So those unions are also, most of them are unsettled, except for, CENA, which actually is in here, which is a small amount.
Great, thank you. I'd expect to see, especially since we want to attract more talent, we want to make sure that we hire more lifeguards and more staff in general, that we are actually experiencing an increase. I get this, the numbers work themselves out, but, and I'm also very curious about, to learn more about how the grants to local nonprofits, just if you have information about how that works, what that looks like, I'd be curious to hear more.
I will defer to BCUF, but they structure the whole grant-making process and the RFP and the selection criterion, but I mean...
Do you know how much that accounts for their overall budget?
I do not have that at my...
Okay. And then same thing here, it's just the information about the BPL budget is a bit, I think it's missing some information. We've heard a lot from BPL about especially some of our smaller libraries, about maintenance issues, and I'd love to hear more about how the BPL budget relates to any capital projects that we have on deck for any of our libraries. Thank you.
So just traditionally, one of the things you're sort of, is a phenomenon that when we do a major renovation to a library, usually the volume of folks, they're called reach, like how many people go there, how many grows, and we tend to end up adding staff to support that extra activity there. So that's a recurring theme that tends to happen. But in terms of the library budget, it's up about $870,000. Part of that is an increase in staffing for the small branches, as you refer to, like areas where they find that there is maybe shortages, or so we're adding staff in those cases.
Do you have a list? Do you know what those branches are?
We do.
We do.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I know that we'll be talking to them as well, but this is our first bite, and I'd like to get that information.
Sure.
Thank you. No more further questions.
Thank you. Councilor Lara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two final questions. First, back to my $3 million question, the increase in contractual services for the Boston Police Department, the $3 million increase. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So there's actually $1 million split between a civil service exam, which we intend to, that would be for the captains, lieutenants, and the sergeants. We're going to sort of start that process. It's a much bigger exam in '23, and that exam will be in '24. Okay. And then in '23, there's also money for a detectives exam. Essentially, we want to, they're basically getting down to the bottom of the list, and they can speak far more eloquently about that than I can. There is a $1.5 million increase for body-worn cameras as well. There's a desire to make sure that, and I don't want to give too many specifics because I don't want to get it wrong, but basically to make sure that they all have them when they need them, that the appropriate officers are all wearing them, which I believe at this point is most of the force. There's a couple small groups that don't wear them. And then there was some RMS, which is Records Management System licensing increases, that is also in that contracted services line. That's just their records management system.
And can you tell me a little bit about why the increase? I'm assuming that those items were in the budget last year, and so what is the $3 million increase?
So it was no, the exams were not in the budget last year, so that's the million. The expanse of the body-worn cameras was another 1.4-ish, 1.5.
Which is to buy more?
Huh?
Purchase more cameras?
Yes.
Okay.
And that includes sort of the licensing for the software, that includes the storage of the data, the management basically of the back-end system as well. And then the software license increases, we see those across the board with different people, just annual increases in software licensing.
Thank you. And my final question is about EEOS. And so we passed BERTO 2.0 last year, and there was a request made by the Office of EEOS to ensure that they could effectively implement BERTO 2.0. Is what is in the budget in alignment with the request that was made by the office? Is that in alignment with the full implementation of BERTO?
Yeah, there are two people in the Environment Department for implementing BERTO. And I believe, was there another request somewhere else? But I think that's the bulk of it.
There's the seed funding for the alternative, what's it called?
The Equitable Emissions Investment Fund,
yes.
Right? $500,000.
Great. So there wasn't anything that was said no to from EEOS in terms of implementing BERTO?
I don't think so. I think we fully supported that proposal.
Thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Did anyone, did we want to do a second round? Did you have, I've missed you, I'm sorry, Councilor Worrell. Councilor Worrell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around equity, and I saw that we defined equity, but what equitable results are we trying to go toward in the city? Home ownership, graduation, what are we targeting over the next year, next 5 years, and how often are we evaluating those data points? What metrics are we evaluating to make sure that we're on track to reaching those equitable results that we're all looking to strive to have here in the city of Boston?
Yeah, I think you
Oh, sorry about that. So we defined equity. I want to also understand what equitable results are we driving towards? Is it home ownership rate, graduation rate? Is it making sure that, the parks in all our neighborhoods are looking the same, the streets, the sidewalks? What is our yearly goal? What is our 5-year goal? And how often are we evaluating those metrics, and what are those metrics that we're evaluating to make sure that we're on track?
Yeah, I think you hit on some of the key metrics, so closing the achievement gap in education, so to make sure that all students are achieving the same level of academic success.
And what does that look like?
That, the school department probably could speak more, but there are assessment tools that they use to show success in that regard, in terms of whether it's MCAS testing or other testing components. Graduation rate is obviously a key component of successful efforts. Home ownership, a lot has been made that most people's personal wealth is tied to their
and is
home.
there like a number that we're trying to reach? Like,
I would defer to the education cabinet on that.
Well, across.
I think it's a myriad of different indices that you're looking at to achieve.
And is that outlined anywhere, like those goals that we're trying to hit in each department, in each category?
I don't know that they're sort of identified as equity exclusively, but there are measures throughout the city in terms of trying to achieve equity goals.
Okay, and then my last question is, as we're pushing more residents to, take other modes of transportation, what is our outlook for, motor vehicle revenue for the city of Boston?
Oh, you mean in terms of adversely impacting the motor vehicle revenue? Well, that's something to be considered, because there's a huge American Rescue Plan investment to make the city one of the most bike-friendly, walkable cities in the country. So you would think that may have an adverse impact on.
Have we seen it,
I don't know that we've seen it. I think one of the
another?
weird dynamics of the pandemic is where people were buying cars because they weren't, commuting necessarily into their downtown office.
I was going to say the largest source of funding on the motor vehicle side would be the motor vehicle registration excise, and that's actually been quite steady, to Jim's point. We also obviously track meter fees and other, which as we move toward a city that with more diverse transportation options, we would look at whether that might be reduced over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I guess, there are different reductions in different line items that I wanted to address as well, but I think that it makes sense for me to ask them to those specific departments. And in terms of the question about what exactly was asked in comparison to what was approved, and the question about how do you prioritize that, I think feels unclear. And in terms of equity, defining equity and metrics or the proper dashboard, and we'll probably see each other again in that hearing to continue to look at how the city of Boston is leading in equity. I think is probably a partnership or collaboration of some sort between administration, Ways and Means, and Council, of course, to figure that out. Where we want to, I appreciate Councilor Worrell's questions and points about equity, as well as all of my colleagues here. And I think the answers that we're hearing is that we're actually not there. And personally, I'm not satisfied with how we've defined equity thus far, because sincerely, it means that if I can't catch up to my counterpart, that I get some sort of heads up, or that I get something to catch up. And when we're in this language in this budget today, we hear a lot about that everyone is empowered, that everyone's needs are met. Of course, that is what we want. In order to do that on an equal playing field, we have to implement equitable solutions, right? In order for us to say, oh, look, everyone's needs are being met. That means that some are at a lower level and they need to catch up. I didn't hear about that. I didn't hear about how we are addressing the gap, how we're addressing the disparities, or how do we help a people catch up. And so we would like for you to keep things on a very plain level, make it plain, right? As Malcolm X once so said. And in this type of conversation, it's difficult with the budget for us to ask you questions, and then you get a report, and then we come back counselors are inundated with a lot of work as is, we'll go into working sessions and we'll work it out and we'll talk it through. But we really want to create a partnership with administration in the interest of yes on one, right? In the interest of the new amendment to the charter, and looking at how can we create something that's more equitable. If something is already put in place, what is the best way to address this? What is the best way to look at departments that you've reduced, departments that you've increased, and what makes sense on our end, but obviously we want to do it in a practical sense and not create a big mess out of the operation budget. So hopefully we can do that moving forward.
Can I add one thing?
You may, Gabby.
I just wanted to say thank you, because I think we all agree that it's a moving target, and yeah, we would love to be able to hear every single person's voice in this process. And we're really looking forward to that collaboration to try to move the needle on that. And as we've said, I think we would defer to specific departments to talk about how their investments are going to try to identify and close those gaps that you're talking about, and specifically what those gaps are, because I think the departments, when this budget was being put together, really did have ideas about what populations are being impacted by these investments and what their goals are. So yeah, but we're really looking forward to keep moving forward on that.
Okay. I mean, I think that my council colleagues will also agree that some of the answers that were not answered here today, like, we don't want to delay this process. So we would like for all the departments that are coming to present future hearings, for us to have the answers here and possibly ahead of time. I have not been getting the responses ahead of time. And so I look forward to hopefully receiving them so that I can send them to my colleagues so that they can have fair time to review them, so that we're prepared in these hearings as well. If we're not prepared ahead of time, then we're not doing the work. And we're not prepared or half prepared because we don't have the answers that we asked for. And that's not speaking to this group here, but the departments in the city. We're still waiting. We don't have them. I asked for them at least a week in advance before each hearing, and I'm still waiting. So that's why you don't have them, and I would like to go on record in communicating that, because it is about transparency, not about embarrassing each other, but rather how we can be honest with each other so that we can do the work together. So, you know, and I'm gonna stop with, you know, I'm not gonna ask, you know, the rest of my questions. I think that, you know, some of the responses, again, can go to specific hearings in each department with specific departments, and we'll address it then. But in the spirit of, again, working together, I'll hold off on some of these questions, and hopefully we can do that collectively. If my council colleagues would like to get a last round before we go to public testimony? No? Okay. We have Laurel Radwin. Okay. We'll go to Derek Evans while we're grabbing her. Okay. Derek Evans in person. Here. Derek, would you like to step to the microphone, or is that comfortable for you from there?
Sure, I can do that.
Please. You have the floor, and I'll allow you 3 minutes. It was 2 minutes, but I know that most people took up to like 3.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Derek Evans, and I am a property owner near the corner of Dale and Wakulla Streets in Roxbury. In fact, every year I pay 9 property taxes for 5 houses, and 4 vacant lots adjacent to Malcolm X Park, the eastern corner. I provide housing for 12 Boston families and over 25 children. I'm here today despite having many other things to do, because I'm concerned about the city's plans for Malcolm X Park. For over 2 years, many of my neighbors have participated in a community engagement process hosted by the Boston Parks and Recreation Department. It was fraught with issues and difficulties, but we, for the most part, made it through. Around mid-March, however, I was driving down Dale Street and I discovered that 58 trees, most of them mature legacy trees, planned and designed and planted by the architectural design firm that is being celebrated over the world today. During Arbor Week, after Earth Day, and on the 200th birthday tomorrow of Frederick Law Olmsted, who is synonymous with Boston and public green spaces. I couldn't believe that I found this site, this big, ugly orange spray paint on the trees. So myself and neighbors who call ourselves the community stewards and friends of Malcolm X Park essentially forced the city to stop until we could get ahead of this. And for the last month, we've been working in what we have thought was good faith with the Parks Department, with Chief Hammond. We haven't heard anything from our mayor. We see her on TV talking about equity, which I hear a lot in this room, and I'm glad to hear it, but I want to see it. And I can give you some metrics on what equity looks like when it comes to environmental justice in this city, in Roxbury, and at Malcolm X Park. It doesn't involve the introduction of toxic plastic turf on acres where there was, for over 100 years and longer, natural grass, producing oxygen, lessening injuries, healthier for kids in the neighborhood of this city, the neighborhood that leads this city, which helps lead this nation in childhood asthma, and particularly among children of color. I don't want to hear all the talk about equity. I want to see it. On last Tuesday, during a meeting which violated the city's public meetings laws, myself and other community members who participated were given a very condescending, one-sided, and frankly, I think unjust, municipally unjust, railroading on, we've been through this, we've been through that, and here's what we're going to do. And here's what we're going to do was they're going to resume this murder of these trees in this park this week, just in time for Olmsted, just in time for Arbor Week, just in time for today and future discussions and talk and TV shows and interviews about equity. So, I want to stress that my group has introduced alternatives, has introduced solutions to problems that we agree with the city, this particular property, and its unchangeable features naturally pose. Not one of them has been taken seriously, discussed, vetted up or down. It is a waste of our time. It has been a waste of our time. So finally, I just want to say again, in addition to being a human being, an African-American man, a longtime resident of Roxbury, a longtime user of the park, a civil rights history and former instructor at Boston College, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in some places elsewhere in this country, fairly well known for my concern and involvement in environmental issues where they intersect with culturally significant and racially marginalized communities in the Gulf Coast. Thank God I was here in Boston and not Turkey Creek, Mississippi, when I saw the paint on those trees, because they were going to be cut 3 days later. So this council and the administration and everyone who follows your directives needs to get on the right page today and fast and engage the community stewards and friends of Malcolm X Park about what we're going to do tomorrow and going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have, thank you, Mr. Evans, for your passion, your work, and your words. We have Bill Singleton.
I hadn't planned to speak today, but good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I hope you're having a good day. I too have come in support of protecting the trees in the park that has been there for centuries. Our lives are only 100 years or a little bit more, but those trees' lives go on and on to different generations of people. So I would like to get the consciousness of this council, of the mayor, and of the people of Boston to think about what we want to leave behind. I understand there are issues with ADA compliance, but surely we can imagine a way that we can have the trees and be compliant. Think of the Grand Canyon. Do we destroy the Grand Canyon for ADA compliance, or do we work around it? I'm hoping that your consciousness is raised today to find a way for us to have both. I am a landlord, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a publisher, and I'm a community person. I don't say leader, but I'll just say that I'm president of United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, but I think we're all leaders in a sense, so I don't like to use the title leader because I like to work with people. I'm hoping that I can work with you and we can build a consensus around the issue that is before us. Let us not cut those trees down. If it's about money, let's pay them. Let's pay them what they want, but keep our trees. If it's our ADA compliant, let's think about the asthma and the wheelchairs. Let's figure out a way that we can keep our environment, because we're in a heat island, all in Roxbury. And after all, does it make sense to save the trees along Melnia Cass, but not in Malcolm X Park? Is there an equity there? Is there equal treatment there? So I'm asking I don't want to bore you with a lot of words. I know you hear a lot of them all day long. I hope I'm brief and to the point. Please help us build a consensus to maintain what we've had for generations. And that is my request to the mayor, and that is my request to this council. That is my request to the people in Roxbury and the people in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singleton. Well, if we don't have any final remarks, we're going to head to a close. Do we have anyone else signed up?
Yeah, hello.
Oh. All right, is that Miss Laura? Miss Laura?
Yeah, it is. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome, Laurel. Thank you. Great hearing. Thank you so much for your leadership in the council. I wanted to backtrack to your excellent remarks about how we reach and get input from everyone. And I'm a researcher who has conducted surveys and other kinds of focus groups with hard to reach people. And there are methods and evidence-based ways to reach out and get the very information that you were talking about earlier today. It's a very intentional approach. It's an evidence-based approach, and survey researchers know how to do it. I think that in my experience, the city departments could do much better in their outreach. As someone else described, sometimes you hear about the meeting and the cake is baked, and you're not going to have your input really heard because the decisions have been made. And I have written to the Boston Transportation Department Commissioner, suggesting that they get an evaluation specialist, suggesting that they learn the state-of-the-art survey methods and outreach methods. And other departments need it too. They need Office of Neighborhood Services. Again, you only know about what's going on if you can access the internet. That is not equitable access. And other departments like the Boston Planning and Development Agency is the same. So thank you for allowing me this input. I don't know if you can put it in the budget to hire some evaluation specialists, top-notch survey research center at UMass Boston, top-notch other survey research services through our universities. And I'll leave my email with your staff in case you'd like to discuss this further. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Laurel, for your wonderful feedback or input. I'll definitely take that into account, and I'm sure my colleagues are interested as well. If we don't have any final comments, I think that we can head to a close unless you guys want more of this. No.
But I just want to thank the council for you, and we look forward to the collaborative relationship that you referred to, particularly as we enact these new powers with the budget approval process. So we definitely want to be very close. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I sincerely mean that. I think that politics, for some reason, when you get into politics and you're just learning about, running for office or what to do, we're all gun-ho about saving the world, and then you realize that in order for you to run, it's a duplicitous sort of method to run for office, like us against the system. And then you get in and you're like, oh wait, it's all people with good intentions, but flawed systems or whatever. And I think that we have a wonderful team and administration as well as the council. I know that I like every single one of my colleagues, and brilliant minds and innovative ideas, and certainly very actual progressive positions. So I look forward to that. I think that we can get together and relook this budget over. I know that Office of, what do we call, returning citizens needs a lot of help. I know that BCYF, I know that ISD, we need more support there. We can't address all of our inspectional service issues if we can't do more there. There are different opinions that we have, but I think we can do this together. All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the public for your testimonies. And this session is adjourned. See you later.
Thank you.